I was thinking more, you have given me in the time, like I read something on Facebook, or it wasn't Facebook, about breathing during sleep.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
the 4, 4, 7, 8, which
Hmm.
I have done and has actually given me some help. You know, you breathe in for 4 counts, you hold for 7, you breathe out for 8. And then you had given me quite a while ago some sort of exercises. Like if you
Yes.
wake up in the middle of the night, you're anxious.
Yeah. I think you're probably referring to what's called progressive muscle relaxation.
Okay.
It's a brief script that's available if you Google progressive muscle relaxation. They're essentially a script that if you read through it once or twice, you'll be able to quickly memorize it, where you go through a process of tightening and relaxing muscles and breathing. And more often than not, it takes probably 3 to 5 minutes to do the exercise. More often than not, people are actually asleep before they finish the exercise because it sets you up positively with breathing and with relaxing, which is what a lot of us are having trouble with right now
Yeah.
in terms of breathing. We're anxious and we've got increased heart rates and so forth, and that we oftentimes are holding ourselves tense without even really realizing it. And the progressive muscle relaxation helps you become aware of that and then helps you deal with that.
Hmm. One of the other things, it's like you almost need a bag of tricks,
Yeah,
don't you? I mean, you got the positive thing, you got the muscle relaxation, you got the breathing.
I prefer to call it a toolbox,
A toolbox. Okay.
not tricks.
So that
I'm not a magician.
I have a hard time uh, late at night is when I get anxious about work specifically or about things not working out. And so I've
Yeah,
kind of taken conscious efforts to memorize, well, Psalm 23, real basic
yeah.
Psalm, but it really helps me focus on, okay, you can't fix this tonight.
Mm,
God's working to fix it. He
yeah.
might fix it tomorrow. Give him a chance while you sleep.
You know, that memorization piece, I was raised Lutheran, and in the church that I went to, we did what was called catechism. You attend Bible classes for 2 years and you memorize things. And the creeds that the Lutherans use during the liturgy, in terms of my own practice of spirituality today, that might not be, it's fine. It might not be something that I would practice automatically. It's interesting during times of high stress, at night when it's dark, I actually find myself to this day repeating those creeds and using that mantra, and that is very comforting. And I would take it a step further. I think you know that I served as a hospital chaplain at the Veterans Hospital for a few years, and I witnessed men in times of need falling back on spiritual things that they had memorized. Songs, Amazing Grace came up a lot. The Lord's Prayer came up a lot. And these are things that these men had memorized in some cases decades ago. And yet, in a time of uncertainty, that really was comforting to them. And that was a real testimony to me when I saw that, the value of including that in my own life.
Yeah. You know, I do a lot of, have done a lot of funerals in the community for people who aren't connected to a
Yeah.
church. And usually the conversation goes something like, well, Pastor, we don't want anything religious at this service. I'll say, okay, what would you like? Well, we like the 23rd Psalm, and we really want Amazing Grace and On the Hill Far Away, the old rugged cross. Okay, so nothing religious. But these are all things that brought them comfort when they
Mhm.
were growing up. And they just happen to be very, you know, um, in the church. So that's good.
Yeah, and maybe those things are spiritual, not so much religious.
Yeah. Pause.
Awkward silence.
I need the cricket sound effect. Oh dear. So then, so we're talked about anxiety. We are all experiencing loss and grief right now. I mean, corporately. I mean,
Yes.
around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a good friend, they're missionaries in Italy, and I'm feeling their loss right now, the neighbors and stuff. How do we manage? And trauma. So you've got grief, all these things coming at us, either our own grief, our loss of our own people, trauma. We're seeing people, that are hurt, or we're seeing things that are just more than almost we can handle. And there's a lot of loss.
Mhm.
Like, for example, just because of my lung stuff, I'm not going in any stores.
Mhm.
Well, that's a real loss. Janelle is having to do all of the shopping,
Mhm.
and I mean, tips for managing all of that. Well, we've been talking about some of them, but grief and loss specifically, any thoughts on that?
I'm really glad that you brought up the loss piece. Something that's been with us really probably starting sometime between say 1998 and 2005 has been that loss and trauma has been brought to our doorstep through the use of media and the instantaneous transfer of information. So that when there is a tragic loss, we can actually, in some cases, participate in that as a viewer real time. You mentioned Italy. Italy is a place that is near and dear to my heart. I don't have roots there, but on my visits there, the history there is so rich, and I really enjoy that culture. And having watched what Italy went through here a few weeks ago, and watching the grief that people were experiencing, and looking at these empty streets, places that we had been where we enjoyed socializing and enjoyed meals with people, and imagining the grief that they were going through as they were losing their loved ones. We, in 50 years ago, I would have been reading that in a newspaper a day or two later. I wouldn't have been watching an actual video put together by some Italian people who were essentially pleading with Americans, take this seriously. Don't do the same thing we did. That video. Did you happen to see that?
Yeah, I saw that video. That
Yeah.
was that was
Wow. Yeah. So I think for people to be aware that the exposure to the media right now gives you vicarious trauma, and in addition to the losses that we're experiencing, the losses of socialization, and so what you want to do is be mindful. And let me make a couple suggestions. I think one perhaps will be obvious, and maybe one won't be. The obvious one is intentionally limiting the media intake right now. And I will jump in here and say I will confess to having taken too much in. I was checking the numbers on the various websites, and I was worried. I have a doctor as a daughter, as you know. She's an emergency room physician, and I was worried about her. And probably about 3 weeks into it, two of my kids mentioned that they were getting a little overwhelmed with the news that they were taking in. And both of them work in the tech industry, and both of them have an array of screens in front of them, even at home, where they're both working from home. And we all said, we've got the Johns Hopkins tab open, and, we're watching it during the day. And so what we agreed was we would make a pact with each other that we wouldn't look at the news from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mm.
And the first couple of days we did it, we had to check in with each other and encourage each other to do it. And by about the third day, I was left with, what was I doing? Obsessing over the news. Not that it's not important to know that.
Right.
I couldn't do a thing about it. And I actually, as a result of that pact, I've gone the opposite direction. And now I'm like not reading the news because it's just not helping. I get enough, which is about 5 minutes.
So we still have a crisis, right?
Yes. I
Okay.
realize we're still in the pandemic.
We're still closed, yeah.
And we're still supposed to shelter at home. That's enough right now. And the limitation has really helped. And so I would encourage anybody who's watching this to really think intentionally about how much vicarious trauma you want to expose yourself to. I saw some videos out of Ecuador that were really painful, and I regret having watched those.
Yeah.
And what they were was just the angst that people were experiencing in a country without much health care that was being overrun by this virus. The second thing is maybe a bit, it won't be a surprise, but you may not have thought of it, which is that when humans have contact, I'm talking about actual physical contact, and in particular holding or hugging, good positive chemicals are released in the brain. And with hugging, two in particular, one of which is oxytocin is released. And what has happened is we're not having contact with people. Our daughter, the doctor, came home and we social distanced with her. And at the end of the visit, I want to say I almost couldn't control myself, but without really thinking it through, I spontaneously hugged her. And Hollis is like, "What are you doing?" Because she, as a doctor, she's facing COVID in Washington every time she's on a shift. And it was like I couldn't stop myself from doing that. So here's the suggestion that I actually read, so I'm borrowing this, which is whoever you're quarantining with, you should give them a 20-second hug every 2 hours. And you just want to make sure, if you need to put a chart up, but it's a chemical. Pardon me?
20-second hug.
A 20-second
every
hug.
2 hours.
Every 2 hours. Yep.
Do they have to be willing in this?
If they're not willing, you should probably make a telehealth appointment with me, and we'll work through those issues.
Your number is coming across on the bottom of the screen.
An 800 number.